We begin tonight with Ukraine. My first guest meeting with Ukrainian leadership who said they requested radar jamming and detection equipment from the United States just last month. For more on the crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by Mikheil Saakashvili, president of Georgia from 2004 to 2013, currently senior statesman at Tufts University Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Lou.
Let's begin with a request from the Ukrainian government of the United States, seeking far more than the MREs and tires that we have supplied to this point. What is the feeling of the leadership in Kiev?
Well, I think Ukrainians are fighting for the existence of their state, but it's also not only them, that's their fate that's at stake. It's fate of Europe it's at stake, because Europe is risking big deal. They might get millions of refugees. They might get huge trafficking zones and lots of other disasters. Also, the credibility of the Western world in general, including the United States, is at stake. And obviously, Ukrainians need assistance. You know, they need political support, they need sanctions, but primarily that against Russia, and they need some hardware as well.
The idea that the United States, and particularly the Obama administration, isn't forthcoming with that kind of aid, that kind of assistance to a democratically elected government and an important power within the region, what is the explanation in your view?
Well, you know, it's a great tragedy, and I think it's a game changer now, because, you know, there was my wife, who's Dutch. She was invited to the same conference where these people were going. She's part of member of board of Global Fund. This is the world organization that fights with contagious diseases. So they were invited to this AIDS conference in Melbourne, and they were all taking this plane. Well, she decided not to go, but lots of good people died. It's a tragedy of big dimensions, and indeed, it's really fight against terrorism. Because I'll tell you two short stories. First, in 2007, John McCain and congressional delegation came, and they went to see our local separatists. They're sitting on the portrait of Putin. Actually, most of them were Russian citizens. And when they left, the congressional delegation were left with two helicopters. This guy shot at one of those helicopters back then, already in 2007. By the way, McCain, exactly in a very Churchillian way, the same way how Churchill warned about Nazis, he was warning about Putin all the time for all these years. Not that many people would heed his warnings. I think everything he was saying will turn out to be right now. Now, the second story is that there are, these people where there was a Russian operative inside Georgian territory, Major Borisov from Russian military intelligence, who was operating terrorist ring. He ordered people to blow up marketplace inside Georgia. He sent people to blow up a railway junction. They had bomb attacks on political party buildings. And this question went so far that President Obama had to raise it with Russians at the summit. But basically what it was, that it was an official state acting as a rogue state, because that's what it is when you sponsor terrorist attacks. And basically we have precedents of them officially sponsoring terrorists, being part of terrorist ring, leading it, planning the attacks, but it went too far this time. So this time it should be a game changer from my point of view.
If it is a game changer, it is one that's occurring in almost silence from European leaders. There seems to be no urgency. There seems to be no outrage. There have been voices of support for Ukraine, but a muted response at best from Europe, which is most proximate and which has the greatest interest in the outcome of the Ukrainian conflict with the separatists.
Yeah, as I said, imagine what would happen if Russia finally succeeds. That would mean millions of refugees. That would mean huge trafficking zone, illegality, violence spreading all around the place, and plus Russia going further, going towards Baltic countries, because remember, final goal of Putin is to blow up the whole NATO, undermine the Atlantic Alliance, undermine the free world. So it's all about values that are at stake also for Europe. So Europe not only is failing to act, Europe actually, and it's always acting too late and too little with all the sanctions, small sanctions that they apply. Europe basically, France namely, is doing outrageous things, because in the midst of this horror, they are trying to sell a very modern battleship that can easily take over of my country, Georgia, of the other parts of Ukraine, which are still not under Russian occupation. How can one in 21st century do such a despicable act of directly encouraging an aggressor? Even towards Adolf Hitler, nobody did anything like that. There was Munich where Europeans were also played part, and appeasement was a very notorious thing. But giving battleship in the middle of the whole thing, that goes beyond something that I can personally comprehend, or any normal person, I guess, can comprehend.
And when you talk about Europe, we don't talk often about France or Germany or with any specificity. We don't even speak of the European Union because it is a government that seems to embody few principles when it comes to foreign policy and has no clear global voice. So if we are to depend on Europe, the cause is lost. Who has the greatest influence over the Ukrainian future, aside from the Ukrainian people and their leadership?
I think the world right now is looking at the United States, as always, traditionally in history, for leadership. I think there is tremendous potential that America has. I think some of the steps already taken were in the right direction, because America was the first one to really target sectors of Russian economy. Because what really should down, this Putin cash, this is his cash machine. It's a big petrol station. Russia as an economy doesn't function. It's a hugely corrupt oligarchy where basically it's a big big petrol gas station, and if you switch off that gas station, cash machine will go down, which means that if the West stops to provide them with oil and gas technologies because they fail to have their own ones because they are so corrupt and inefficient, if the West stops to give them other modern things, access to other things, access to financing, if the Western world really goes after the assets and basically also can freeze their currency because they don't keep it in Chinese yuans. They keep in dollars, all the stolen money, and euros. And by the way, you know, Vladimir Putin's own daughter lives in Netherlands, in a country whose citizens they were murdered. So they are so much fond of the West. They're very vulnerable. This is not North Korea. I haven't seen many Iranians buying houses in Florida. Yeah. I mean, the officials of the regime.
I think it's important to remember that Russia is not North Korea. And that Vladimir Putin is a clever and, to this point, highly successful leader of not a regional power, but a global power, given the warheads that sit atop those missiles, those ICBMs. So my question to you is, as we conclude here, is there sufficient capacity within the leadership of the United States, therefore, to actually move to confront the Russians and to halt their ambitions militarily if need be?
Well, I would argue that with all the things you said about Putin, there was a certain moment when he was acting from his aggressive point of view in a very cunning and maybe like in his own smart way, but since the last several months, I think he has committed a number of very big strategic blunders. I mean, he created the whole country, which is a huge country. Ukraine is a big country. It's the largest country in Europe, right, with a very strong anti-Russian, anti-imperial identity. That's one major strategic blunder. He got carried away with easiness. He took Crimea. We weren't about, if the world had done something about Georgia, Crimea wouldn't have happened. If people had done something about Crimea, East Ukraine would have happened. If they had done something about Eastern Ukraine, the plan had not happened. But meanwhile, Putin got carried away into something for which there is no good way out.
I understand your view that he has blundered here. Yes. But I think we all have to acknowledge that he now controls Crimea, and his forces still are on the eastern border of Ukraine, and he may be the determinant force in how this resolves.
He is a leader of a highly inefficient and very vulnerable regime. So if the Western world, led by the United States, apply proper sanctions, if they help Ukraine to fight back, and Ukrainians are very heroic and capable of fighting back. I've been there. I've seen the soldiers. Some of my friends are there.
The Ukrainians are acquitting themselves very well in their conflict with the Russian-backed separatists.
This is a front line for freedom.
The question here now is not the quality of their leadership or the fervor with which and their patriotic defense of their country. The question is now the strength and the willingness of U.S. leadership to assert itself in Ukraine.
It's right now a front line of freedom and all the values that made America so strong. So it's really high time to stand up. I'm sure lots of people in Washington, especially in America overall, understand that. And America has to lead Europe. I think eventually it will happen. It's better sooner than later because time is running out. I think in the end Putin will break his neck, but it might cost the world a hell of a lot of pain. And we want to avoid that. So I think we are dealing with the situation when values are at stake. These values made so, and then you said they're regional, they're big global power, but they're global power in terms of making problems. Because imagine, after what they create on Crimea, what will happen with American allies in Japan, in Philippines? If borders don't mean anything anymore, then people can go and grab just any islands because Russia has created this precedent. So it's not only about values, but it's also about pragmatic principles of international law, which made America also strong. So everything is at stake. And I think it's, in the end, everybody has to act and bring their forces together.
And we hope that your confidence is well placed. This president leaving open the question of his regard for
Well, I went today on the Hill with a few senators, and they do understand this thing.
Mikheil, thank you very much for being
Thank you for inviting me.
Saakashvili.